Okay, sorry about that. It dropped at the very end. Let me just finish up a couple of points here rather than re-record the entire one. I just want to add on this part right here. So I was just saying that those who are opposed to the idea that ID when you go to vote are arguing that certain groups are unfairly burdened by that requirement. And I was making the point that it might seem pretty straightforward that you should have to show a driver's license or a state ID, but there are places in many where many individuals don't have a driver's license. They don't have the state issued ID, and in order to get that, they often need to get their birth certificate. They need to prove who they are, which sometimes is complicated for certain individuals. And so then, when this is investigated by those who are concerned by these actual laws that have actually been implemented in a number of places, is saying that the burden is placed particularly on people of color, people with lower incomes. And so, if those individuals are inconvenienced by this or aren't even allowed to vote because they don't have that ID, it's more than just an inconvenience, of fundamentally a challenge to political equality, which, as we're going to be finding out, and if you've read the textbook, you recognize as one of the pillars of the idea of democracy. And so, this is a big deal that there is a solution that is proposed to a problem that doesn't really exist, voter fraud. And the real implications is that a number of individuals are inconvenienced in an obvious way to participate in the political system. And that makes it a bigger problem. So, a couple of clips about this to help us think about the idea of whether or not photo IDs are a good thing or a bad thing. As I want to be clear about throughout this course, I don't need you to agree or disagree with me. I don't need you to agree or disagree with the videos. Instead, I try to choose the videos in ways that allow us to kind of think about the underlying issues. And I do it in a number of different ways. So the first one is a Daily Show clip from a few years ago about this, and they certainly have a position that they're taking that they seem to be ones of advocating that this is something that shouldn't be done, that they're against photo ID laws. And so I don't necessarily need to think that it is A, funny, and B, is worthwhile kind of thinking about some of the underlying reasons of them. There's another clip that goes even further, is to argue on the Larry Wilmore show that was also on Comedy Central, that takes even further, taking a look at Alabama, that research showed that Alabama was talking about closing a number of DMVs, Departments of Motor Vehicles, to save money, but the places where they were tending to do that were in the rural parts of Alabama, which are the places where there might be a higher proportion of poorer people who don't have state-issued ID, don't have a driver's license because they don't drive, and if the DMV is closed, which is where you would go get that ID, that choice in terms of saying we're trying to save money might have some real implications in terms of access to the polls. And if that's the case, I'm concerned. So definitely take a look at those videos. They're fair game for the exams, but I also think that they will help us kind of think about this issue. And so at some point you should see it. You can pause this and take a look at them, or you can take a look at them when you want. And finally, the last slide is the idea of democracy as compromise. Many observe that when democracy works, it is because everyone, winners and losers alike, is willing to compromise. That we can talk about the idea of democracy, we can talk about it as being an aspiration, we can talk about it as being a continuum, we can talk about it in terms of rule by the people and exactly what people, and sort of deconstructing it as we've done in this part of our discussion. But some have said to think about this is to think of democracy as a compromise, is that in order for it to work, you need to be willing to compromise. Table saying, I want this, and if I don't get it, I will destroy the place, I will just take a bat to the place, or I'm just going to walk away. And linked to that is this idea, also an important role of moderation. And that is the hope and the trust that when you are in the winning position, when the government does what you want it to do, that you do not abuse that and try to destroy the other side or to make it so that the other side will continually be in a losing position. And so there needs to be that trust that those who are winning recognize that at some point there are going to be some issues where they won't always win, and that those who are losing now might be able to persuade some of the others who are on the winning side to change their views, or situations might change and those who were losing might end up winning. And the idea of winning and losing might actually be going too far and pointing out this idea that it needs to be about winners and losers. There is certainly some aspect of democracy that there are people who will be happy with the outcomes and some people will be unhappy with the outcomes. But another way of thinking about this idea of compromise is to emphasize the process of decision making, not simply whether or not this outcome makes us happy or unhappy. And so some who look at that are talking about that democracy works when there's active listening and you listen to why people disagree with your position. You listen to people who agree with your position, but you think about the reasons why. You don't just say, oh, I dislike this individual because they disagree with me. Instead, you hear why they might have a different perspective and you might actually learn from that conversation. And so what this is saying is that the journey is perhaps as important, and sometimes some would say even more important than the destination. How a decision is reached can be as important and maybe more important than what the decision is. And so that's at least the hope. So that's the first set of lectures about the idea of democracy. And again, I apologize that it's split into two, but y'all are smart and can figure this out and recognize that this is a work in progress. And if you have any concerns or questions, so, thanks.